Thank you for helping to get everybody organized today, but specifically thanks to the Washingtonians who are willing to share their stories about what happened during the transportation debacle over the Christmas holiday. I know that many of us saw stories on television, but now we're here trying to make sure that this never happens again. That is, that we never leave people stranded without the communication or the resources to get to their destinations when weather does allow. But many of you have your own individual stories, and I think that will help inform us as we go towards this hearing this week in Washington, D.C. So thank you for being willing to share. I know many of you reached out to our offices. So I think I'm going to start with you, Veronica, and if you could just tell us what you think is important about what transpired, where you are today in getting refunds, and what we need to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. And maybe unmute yourself. Can't hear you, Veronica.
Hello?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. New to the Zoom. So where I'm at right now with Southwest is they sent me an email refunding me 50,000 points. I did respond to the email and told them that I would take the 50,000 points, but I also would like my money refunded to me. I have not heard anything back from them in regards to my my financial refund. And then I'm sorry, what was the other question that you asked me?
Well, Veronica, tell me what happened to you. What are the circumstances by which you were traveling during this time period? Did you get to your destination?
No. So my son, who's in Fort Stewart, Georgia, was supposed to arrive for his Christmas vacation. As you know, being in the military, you only have a certain amount of time to come home and visit with your family. And he only comes during the Christmas holiday. He flew into California to pick up his younger brother, they were both going to fly in to Washington. Southwest, who we've always flown, have never had any issues with them. Did not send an email or any kind of information, and my two boys were waiting at the airport, waiting to check in, and had notified me that their flight had been delayed. They gave them a day and a time, which would be the following day, and then had canceled again without informing us what was going on. And I understand that the weather has a lot to do with it, or pilots are the airlines are understaffed. I understand that, but those things usually occur in the East Coast. And we were out here in the West Coast, and we didn't have a weather condition that would prevent them to fly in. So this was very.
Oops.
Oh, you're back, Veronica.
Okay. So, we tried to find other flights. Of course, they were charging over thousands of dollars just to fly from California to Washington, which was ridiculous. And we couldn't even find a single flight for them to come home. So I didn't get to see my son at all during the holiday season.
So he just flew back to the East Coast?
He had to wait. He had to wait until he didn't find a flight back until after the New Year's, the day before he was actually the day that he was supposed to be on base and report. That's when he flew back. So and my son had experienced an awful year in 2022. He had lost several members of his battalion due to suicide and to murder. So this was something that he really needed to come home and just feel family comfort around him when this, during the holiday season. So that was my experience.
Veronica, I'm so sorry that you didn't get to spend Christmas with your son or sons. I'm sure that was very emotional for both of you. And I think you contacted our office, so we appreciate and we'll follow through with Southwest about you getting a refund. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Hope, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. Like so many others, we unfortunately spent Christmas in an airport rather than with our family. Like so many others, we waited in line for over 3.5 hours to rebook in person, only to have that rebooked flight also cancel. When we re-entered the line after waiting another 90 minutes, we were told that there was no one left to work the desk and that we would need to leave the airport without a plan. We left on Christmas night with no rental cars available to us, no flights left in other airlines after we were assured our rebooked flight at 11:30 p.m. was worth waiting for, and no option to reach our luggage. Additional rebookings, our planned return flights from Memphis, where we were trying to get for Christmas, were also canceled, leaving us without our bags full of Christmas presents, our winter clothing, and more for nearly 2 weeks. Out of care for his immunocompromised family members, this would have been the first year since the start of the pandemic that my boyfriend would be able to go home for Christmas. We pursued every avenue available to us to ensure that he wouldn't be absent for the 3rd year in a row, including attempts to reroute through nearby airports and drive the rest of the way. But by the time it became clear that we were wrong to sit tight as advised, any means of alternate transportation, planes, trains, automobiles, the full gamut, were no longer available to us. I appreciate the initial steps that Southwest has taken. Every team member we've interacted with, whether it was the elderly man working the counter at DIA since 3 a.m, or the baggage agents in Memphis who finally tracked down our missing bags using air tags we'd stashed in our luggage, were warm and empathetic and have seemingly tried to do everything they could for us with very limited options. That said, we would go weeks at a time without anything beyond a form letter response, and were asked to take on the burden of several $1000s of charges. We found our best source of information in other impacted travelers on online messaging boards and social media when we should have been able to rely on Southwest. We were also fortunate enough to have savings and credit available to us to cover those charges. But even with those resources, it resulted in a lot of anxiety, wondering if we would in fact be reimbursed. I can't imagine how that would have been compounded if that delay had caused in our accounts being overdrafted, like it did for many travelers. After nearly a month, we have finally been reimbursed for the majority of our expenses, and it was a deep relief to get that balance off of our credit cards, but it was a fight to do so, and a fight that I don't think it was fair to ask travelers after the emotional baggage that we already took on.
So you haven't been fully reimbursed, Hope? There's still some issues left?
There's a little bit of rules that are coming out of the woodwork at the 11th hour, whether that be itemized receipts for meals over a certain amount or baggage compensations stopping at the time they find your bags, not at the time your bags are returned to you. We're pretty tired of 3 hours of wait time, so I think our instinct is to let some of that go. But it does just feel a little bit like insert to injury at this point.
How many times do you think, or how many hours do you think you spent trying to communicate to them?
I mean, upwards of at least 20. I mean, I have some screenshots of phone calls that went 3 hours that were disconnected, of standing in line for 5 hours that day at the airport, going back and forth on social media when we couldn't get anyone on the phone. I mean, I would say conservatively 30 to 40 hours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So you never made it home to family at
No,
Christmas?
we stayed in Denver for an extra 4 days until we could get a flight back to Seattle.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Next, we're going to hear from Karen Hartman.
Good morning. So I actually have a relatively good story. In spite of certain inconveniences and such. So my husband and I had booked a flight from Spokane to Phoenix on the 30th. And because of the restrictive hotel policies for cancellations, we didn't book a hotel. We didn't reserve a hotel room in Phoenix until I think it was the 26th or 27th. By that time, we kind of thought, oh, this is great. Everything will be going. The weather delays are in the rear view mirror, and so there shouldn't be a problem. We also booked our rental car, which had a, I think, 24-hour cancellation policy. So later that we didn't hear anything from Southwest Airlines, and within a day after we had booked our hotel and the rental car, we saw on the news that there were continuing delays for Southwest. We hadn't heard anything for them. So this is when we became concerned. And fortunately, we were within the time period so that we could cancel the hotel and cancel the rental car. We never heard from Southwest. I mean, not even a heads up of, hey, we might not be going, keep watch on the app. So for the days before our flight, we just tracked the same flight. It was a mid-afternoon flight and it goes every day. So we tracked that flight and it was canceled. We were leaving on Friday. It was canceled Tuesday. It was canceled Wednesday. It was canceled for Thursday. So when our Friday flight wasn't canceled in the 24 hours in advance, as the other ones had been for the previous days, we figured, okay, well, this is good. We're going to be going. And so, but we still didn't book any hotels or rental cars until, I don't know whether it was late in that day on the 29th or even early on the 30th, but it was at the end of, of that time period because we wanted to make sure that our flight was going. Our flight did end up going. It left on time. The flight was fine. The airplane was fine. Everything was great. But the stress leading up to it, because I mean, had we had reservations at hotels or had we had a rental car, and if our flight hadn't gone, we would not have gotten that money back. There weren't flights for days after that. We tried to rebook on other airlines and so forth, and either they were outrageously expensive or there just weren't any seats. So we didn't suffer from any financial losses. As I say, we went on schedule and returned on schedule and everything was fine. But just the lack of communication was unacceptable. I mean, at least you'd think, give people a heads up so that they can, look ahead, try to make arrangements or figure out what they're going to do.
Did you try to call them during this time period?
Oh, no. Wait, I saw that there were long wait times and it was just easier to check on the app and see if flights were being canceled. No, we didn't try to call. We figured that we probably wouldn't get through.
Thank you. I know that this is one of the concerns because a lot of people are trying to lean on the apps as a way of this is where we're moving to communication, but you're telling us something important, and that is that they're not really the perfected tool to communicate with at this point.
No, because I mean, there is no communication. It's just one way. The flight the day before, the same flight has been canceled, and it was canceled 24 hours in advance of that flight. So we could only guess as to what might happen with ours. And that if we hadn't been canceled, we thought, well, we're probably going. Maybe we're going. We'll go to the airport and see.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Rob Perkins.
Hi, good afternoon. So our circumstance was that we were trying to fly my daughter and her partner up from Burbank, California, after an unfortunate miscommunication by Amtrak. They would have been on the train if another logistical problem at another company hadn't gotten in the way of that. We were able to secure tickets on the website for them for $556, flying from Burbank to Oakland and onto PDX, onto Portland, Oregon. After they were checked in and they got to the counter, they were informed that the second leg of the flight was canceled. Rachel asked them for a refund at the gate, not at the gate, at the ticket counter, and was refused because the first leg was not canceled, but the second leg was, and they should take the first one and find out what to do. They then offered them a flight from Burbank to Seattle over Sacramento, which would have come in around 10:30, 11 o'clock that night. I could have the numbers wrong. I didn't write that part down. So they flew to Sacramento, and at Sacramento, they were waiting for their flight and it was canceled, and Rachel got in line and got rebooked for another flight an hour later, and it was canceled, and then a third one, and it was canceled. And then finally, it's about 2 in the morning, and they set up bookings for them to return to Burbank on the 23rd of December. So there they were at home 24 hours later, with no hotels or accommodations offered in Sacramento. They basically sat in waiting seats for an entire calendar day and tried to keep their luggage next to them. We decided as a family, this being the first Christmas in years that my entire family of 5 kids and their partners would be home with us for Christmas. So we decided to delay Christmas until the 27th and fly them out on the 26th. And we're offered the same flight on Southwest's website for the same price, $556. Before they could get to the airport, that flight had also entirely been canceled with no notice about whether or not there was a refund in that moment. So on the 26th, they had to go back home. And from their apartment, they had Zoom Christmas with us on the 27th of December, with most of the family there in person. And this caused some emotional sadness. Nowhere to the degree I think that the others have talked about, and they talked about the loss that they've been feeling. But it was still, we missed them. Even though they were on Zoom the way we are now, we just missed them and had to decide to schedule later on. As far as the refunds go, I took some time to actually write a formal business letter making the claims for refunds. I contacted Chase Bank to arrange for the dispute of the charges, primarily there because the website notices were not clear, and the app notices were not clear. And we had tried to call Southwest and wait 2 hours on the phone and get disconnected anyway, and just that same kind of experience as the others. Now, fortunately for us, I did find the form on Southwest's website. You have to click through a lot of strange links to get there, and filled it out for a refund for both of those canceled flights. And to their credit, I'll say the same thing that I think Hope said it. Everyone we talked to, when we could talk to someone, was kind and compassionate about it. We knew they were overwhelmed. We knew that stuff was happening behind the scenes. And it had become evident that it was far more than weather. And Southwest, I got some form letters saying they'd escalated our requests for refunds. And at this date, the refunds are in. So the $1,112 that we spent have come back to us. And we're in a place of income and privilege where we could float that money for that period of time without suffering. It should be said too that on the way, their experience in Sacramento, we had to drive from Vancouver, Washington to Seattle, and we actually got stuck in Tumwater after the weather really closed down on us. We thought we'd get a hotel room there, and we found one. And we were actually texting back and forth while sitting in the hotel room to decide whether or not to continue the trip. And again, about 2 a.m., there we were in Tequila with the weather closed on us. So we were stuck there for 2 nights while the ice and the storms in Vancouver had to clear in order for the roads to be cleared. And I think that set us back about $400 plus the price of gas. And we were in a car that we had borrowed from my son because he was the one with a car that could drive through that kind of weather. And so I'm feeling pretty good about how Southwest has treated us, given all that they had to do. I'm aware that their leadership had changed only 8 months before, but not long, not soon enough to make the changes that would have prevented this. And I'm hoping they will do what I expect and take full responsibility and offer refunds to everyone who's talking here and everyone who needed it. I hope they can.
So Rob, you wouldn't have gone to Seattle to pick up your daughter if you didn't think that she was going there that night. So they
Sure.
had kept telling her to go on to Northern California and then go to Seattle. So are you asking for reimbursements for your hotel?
I haven't tried to ask for reimbursements. We just wrote it off. Again, we're in an economic circumstance where we could treat that as a day off for the two of us, Rachel's mom and me, and just kind of enjoy it. and there's a great pizza place there in Tumwater. So we had a reasonably good time considering all the weather. But it would have been so much nicer to have the family home for Christmas for the first time.
Yep.
So much.
Okay. Thank you. And the last person we're going to hear from is Alex Kane.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for establishing this. Really appreciate it. So our story actually begins before Christmas on the 16th. We were flying from SeaTac through Midway, Chicago Midway, to Albany, where around where my family lives. And our flight was delayed in Midway because they could not find a crew to staff our plane. And so they had to assemble a crew at the very last minute. And, you know, these are the sorts of delays that you just come to expect every once in a while when you're flying a plane. And we arrived in Albany a couple hours later than we expected. We got a hotel near the airport. We thought that that was going to be our travel story for the holiday. We were celebrating early to avoid the Christmas rush. And so, you know, we went home to the Berkshires where my parents live. You know, had a nice trip out there, and then we were flying back on December 23rd via Southwest. We were leaving Albany and arriving in Denver, and then traveling up to SeaTac. So we leave Denver, or we leave Albany on time at around 5 o'clock Eastern time, and everything seemed to be going great. SeaTac was open again. They closed their runways for a little bit, and so we were nervous about that. But we thought that luck was on our side. We arrive in Denver, we land on time, and check our phones to discover that our flight from Denver to Seattle had been delayed by a couple hours. It was originally supposed to leave at around 11. It was now booked to leave at around midnight. So we thought, okay, that's not so bad. And then we saw that there were about 4 or 5 planes in front of us waiting to get to the gate on the tarmac. And that's when we knew something was wrong. We sat on the tarmac for about an hour before we finally made it into the airport itself. And we saw that there were hundreds of people standing in line waiting to rebook their flights, even before you know, we could even get to our gate. The moment we stepped out into the airport, we saw people crying, sleeping on the floor. There were lines at restaurants because they were about to close. You know, we decided to get a bite to eat. Even though the restaurants were technically supposed to be closed, one of them heroically stayed open long enough to serve as many people as they could before they were forced to close. We knew that, you know, there was a flight before us to Seattle, to SeaTac, that was leaving about 2 hours before ours was scheduled to leave. We knew that if that one took off on time, we were going to be okay. It did not take off on time. They boarded the people onto the plane, and we watched them load the luggage onto the plane. And then an hour or two later, they unloaded the luggage from the plane, and everyone deplaned after sitting at the gate for hours. And they were immediately just set loose. No one told them where to go or what to do. They just set them loose in the airport. And we knew that we weren't going to be leaving that airport for several days. So very shortly thereafter, our flight, which had been delayed 2 more times to that by that point to around 2 a.m. On Christmas Eve, had been canceled. They told us to go wait in line and rebook our flight. And by this point, we had already heard stories from other people who'd been waiting in the airport for 2-3 days already to rebook flights to get out of Denver. So we knew that if we stayed in that airport, we were not going to leave until well after Christmas. So we found a hotel, we got a rental car, the last rental car that we could find in the greater Denver area, and we drove. We drove from Denver all the way up to Redmond, Oregon. We didn't want to risk driving over the mountains, considering all the weather that had been going on. So we booked a flight from Redmond, Oregon to SeaTac, and the whole trip cost us around $3,000. And you know, we were traveling on Christmas Eve and Christmas. We were just driving, and you know, Christmas dinner was at an Arby's. So it was you know, not the worst, not the best, just Arby's. But you know, it was certainly not the Christmas that we'd expected. And, you know, as everyone said, the actual staff, the human staff that we communicated with for Southwest was very understanding and very caring, and clearly dealing with a system that was not accommodating to our interests or theirs. But at the end of the day, we were able to get our luggage back 2 weeks later. We were able to get reimbursed mostly. There were a couple of receipts that we didn't have. And by that point, we just decided we would take the loss and get most of our money back. Yeah, that was it was quite the experience, but we only got that money back after haranguing them on Twitter DMs, which seemed to be the only way that we could get any reliable communication from them. The app was not working. The phone service, as you've heard, was not helpful. Emails, not really a thing. It was only through Twitter DM that we were able to get a hold of them, which was ridiculous. But yeah, I'd say that we're finally ready to put it all behind us, and certainly not travel Southwest again anytime soon.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Alex. Thanks all of you for sharing your stories. I mean, you're reminding all of us how special Christmas really is and how important it is to be with your loved ones. And that's all we were asking for. People were asking for those special moments, precious time to spend with their families. And so I'm sorry that it turned out that many of you didn't get that opportunity. The issues that you're bringing up, we definitely want to try to address. We want to make sure that our airline system communicates. We all, and each one of you articulated this, understand weather and weather predicaments, but we still need to have communication, and we can't have a system that goes down for 4 days without anybody knowing what their outcome or their availability is, particularly when it happened on such a precious holiday season when people were trying to have those special moments with family. So the other thing is we definitely want to make sure that everyone is reimbursed for their expenses and costs. And so some of you have mentioned a few things. We'll follow up with you individually about that if there is something that you are still concerned about, because we want to make sure that Southwest does honor this commitment as it relates to refunds. And then, you know, we want to plan for the future. We want to plan for a transportation system that isn't one-way communication, as you said, when they're telling you just the flight is canceled. But in this case, we needed a lot more information so people could make wiser choices about what their alternatives were going to be. And that is what we need to make sure we have in the future. So I just really appreciate all of you participating in this and telling us your stories. And it's been a tough couple of years in air transportation in general because of the COVID pandemic. And we certainly want to make sure that we have a system where, again, as I mentioned, that the communication of the customers are critical and critically important to them and their families. So I'm going to, Ansley, turn it back to you just to see if there is any questions from any of the press at this point in time. And
Sure.
then if not, we'll see if there are any other points that the panelists want to bring up.
Sure. So if you are a member of the media, if you can hit the question and answer and indicate that you have a question, or you can hit the raise hand function and we can call on you. I'll give you a few seconds if you have any questions for any of the participants or the senator. Let me make sure I am seeing any. I might not have any questions just yet. Sophia, am I seeing everything here?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, here there's. Hey, we have Ian Duncan with Washington Post. I'm gonna unmute you.
Hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Senator, thanks for doing this. I just wanted to see, what is it that you're hoping to hear from Southwest on Thursday? Like, what questions are you going to have for them? What do you think that they can tell you that might reassure you or just might inform how you're thinking about these issues?
Well, it was clear that there was a system failure at Southwest, and we want to understand why they haven't upgraded this system, that other airlines may have been better resourced, may have had more staffing, but clearly they had a back-end communication system that led them after the initial weather event to cancel many days of travel. And that left many of these constituents that I just heard from stranded in various parts of the country. And so we want to understand why had that system not been updated, and what are they going to do now to make sure that that is fixed in the future, and again, compensate people for their expenses.
Oh, we have one more. David? You should be unmuted, David. With NPR?
There we go. Sorry about that. Senator, I'm wondering if you are supporting the, I don't know what they're calling it exactly, passenger Bill of Rights that Senator Markey and Senator Blumenthal have introduced. It's come up before, but it hasn't gotten very far in the Senate. Is that something you're supportive? And if not, what other kinds of regulations would you like to impose on the airline industry?
I would like to try to get started if witnesses would find their way back to the table. Thank you.
I think somebody else might have a hearing on in the background. So just make sure if you can mute yourselves once you're done asking the question, but it sounds like somebody else has a hearing to go to. I think the issue is that, yes, we believe that past efforts in the FAA reauthorization bills that protect consumers are good ideas. And we're certainly going to make sure that there are consumer protections in this marketplace. We think protecting the consumer and making sure that they get the service that has been promised to them, and that the communication is there to communicate with them, particularly during a crisis like this. We don't think this is the last time a weather event or some particularly challenging event is going to hit our system. Look at what we've just been through, a 100-year event. So we definitely want to improve the communication to our customers. It can't be that you give a dividend at the end of the year, but then don't put the workforce in place to communicate to consumers, who then have to spend days or the stories that we've heard about people stranded, not even knowing what their options are. So we think these are consumer protections, and we believe the consumers deserve to have these kind of protections in this particular service that they have basically paid for.
Okay, and we have time for one more questions. Ryan Harris with Northwest News Radio.
Hi, thank you, Senator. One of the folks that was talking mentioned that their flight didn't have a crew to staff it. Are we considering including in this passenger Bill of Rights or in separate legislation, excuse me, maybe a requirement for airlines, if they're going to book these flights, they should book them knowing they're going to have the staff to manage them?
Well, we're definitely through this hearing that we're going to have this week, and through the hearings we're going to have about FAA authorization, we are definitely going to talk about staffing. When we ask the question, how is it that some airlines got through this process and seemed like they really, even though we had horrific weather all across the United States, seemed to have been able to operate and deliver very or fairly reliable service. I mean, I'm not saying no flights were canceled, but seemed to be able to handle the interruptions, get people back on track, and communicate with customers. I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm just saying some were better than others. And when you drill down on why, it is because they staffed to the appropriate ratio to handle the events that we were dealing with. And again, we want to see an air transportation service that is reliable as it can be, given that there are natural events like weather, but that they are communications and people are communicated with in addition. No American should be stranded somewhere for 4 days without communication about what their options are. And the other thing is that when they were stranded and they looked for alternatives, they were looking at extraordinary pricing or extraordinary circumstances that also the system didn't work well to help them continue on their ways. In some instances, I'm sure there were as all of these constituents said, you know, kind, thoughtful voices that were trying to help them and trying to help them on their way. But that this issue of staffing and communication is something we really have to deal with.
Thank you, everyone. We are at the end of our time allowed. I will say, remind reporters, please feel free to email Callie Hare, our press secretary, with any additional questions you may have. Thank you to everyone who took part on the panel. And you also have our contact information, and we are here to help. So please feel free to call or email us as well. And as a reminder, the hearing that we've been referencing is Thursday at 10 a.m. And thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, thanks to the Washingtonians. Thank you guys so much for this, because you really are putting a face to the challenges that we face on these policies. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator.